Should you rent to own a storage shed?
What does rent to owning a storage shed mean?
It's not a loan, it is a rental contract.
What are some of the cons?
High cost.
High cost.
You're going to pay way more than like the cash price.
You don't own the shed. You can't really do a whole lot with it besides use it for a shed.
No modifications.
No modifications. Yep.
Benefits. One would be like if you're paying for self-storage and you have a backyard, you can put a simple shed in your backyard and have payments that are comparable to self-storage. At the end of the contract, you actually own some.
Or short term. Maybe you're using it for a couple of years. You just need it for a year. You can return it, no penalty.
This was something that when we started building sheds, almost 7 years ago, we knew absolutely nothing about. It was a learning process to figure this all out. I feel like we were kind of thrown into it. We didn't know what we were doing in the beginning or what it was even about. And there's kind of a lot of confusion, can be. You'll see a lot of advertising, maybe. A big one would be no credit check, and maybe you'll see something like $150 and get it delivered, that sort of thing. But what does that really mean? So today we're going to talk about rent to own, what rent to owning a shed really looks like, what you're signing up for, how it works, all that good stuff. What we're going to do is I got an actual contract of a rent to own agreement that we did back in October. This was like a 10 by 16 shed and a 36-month contract. So we're just going to talk about it.
Yep.
First thing about rent to own is it is not a loan. You're renting it. You're renting it just with an option to buy. We work with one particular company we have ever since we started. We get paid the cash price, basically as the same as if the person was paying cash for the shed. And then they take care of all the pay. We set up the contract. We do all the paperwork up front, and then they take over everything. There's contract lengths from 24 months out to 60 months, so 5 years. So we're going to give you the breakdown on a 36-month contract, which is what this one was. So this was a 10 by 16 shed. Cash price was $83.75. The rental payment comes in at $387.73. So that can be kind of weird. So you're like, oh, how much am I really paying? So if you want to know what you're actually total going to spend over the whole contract, you can times that payment times your however many months you have. So 36. That one you would come out to, should be in your contract somewhere. Sometimes it's hard to find. $13,973. That's if you paid the whole thing. You just made your monthly payment, and then at the end of that contract, you acquire ownership. It's your shed at that point. Up until that point, you're just renewing a rental contract every time you make that payment. It is true. There is no credit check. You need a name and a phone number and a valid ID, whether driver's license or something else. And you can do one of these. They typically will require a 2 months up front, to get the building actually delivered. So in this case, it would have been about $800 up front. So your first month payment and the last month payment on the contract.
So what happens if, I'm 2 years in and I just want to buy the building? Do I pay part of the cash price? Or how does that work? How is that figured?
That's a good question. Another thing, you'll see a lot of them where it says no penalties to pay off early.
Yeah. Yep.
Which is true.
Kind of true.
Yeah, which is true. I'll just give you an thexample here. The company they're not all the same. They're going to vary. But the company that we work with, so an early purchase option. So remember, you're signing this contracts for the total payments is $13,973, right? You can purchase the property at any time by paying us as follows. The total of all remaining lease payments for ownership, including any fees or taxes, times 65%. So basically you're going to pay 65% of the remaining balance on the contract. So let's just say you paid on that thing for 2 years. You would pay, and say you got a tax refund or whatever, you just have some cash lying around, you want to pay off your building, you would owe $3,024 left. Was what you would owe.
This is on a 3-year contract.
That's on a 3-year contract. That's after you already made 24 payments of the 387. So just to give you an example, you're gonna pay more than cash. So it's a little bit, there is no technical pay a like early payment penalty or whatever, but you're always going to pay more than you would with cash. Everybody knows, like when you're buying a building, it's if you've never been, you don't know anything about rent to own. I mean, you're kind of relying on your salesperson to explain it to you. And I mean, I do a couple of these a year. We do very few, but like nobody's sitting there and like gonna actually read the contract while during the sales process. So I go through and like hit a few things that people should know. One thing is the maintenance and alterations. You are technically not supposed to like alter the building in any way while it's during the rent to own contract. So you can't like add walls or finish it out technically, or you're breaching the contract. The other thing is in ours, it has you cannot allow any person or any animal to live in the property. So don't rent to own a shed if you plan to live in it. And another important thing is like you are responsible for the building while you are renting it. So if a tree falls on it, a flood washes it away, you're responsible for that unless you have like homeowners insurance, or you can actually, they do have most rent to own companies will have an option for like $7 or $8 a month where it's basically like buying their insurance. The building will be covered if anything happens.
Another aspect of rent to own is the repo part of it. Like if you stop making your payments, your dealer or whoever delivered the building has the right to come pull that building. You don't have a whole lot of
So
say in that.
That would be another important thing to consider, like, yeah, when you're rent to owning a shed. So, like, there's no credit check. So, I mean, you could be super leveraged with debt and, like, really have, like, no margin. And it's, like, your responsibility to know that you can make that payment, not just today, but, like, down the road. Because the last thing we want to do is you've got your shed full of stuff and then something happens, you can't make your payment. The last thing you want to do is have to come pick that thing up and with all your stuff in it. Just keep that in mind. Like, yeah, there's no approval because it's not a loan and there's no credit check, so it's really easy to do. So as long as you got your money for the 2 payments up front, you can get a building delivered, but they can go away.
The main thing that people don't realize with rent to own is you're going to pay sometimes almost twice as much for a building as the cash price. It's not the cash price divided into payments. And I think like people probably go into a shed lot and go like, oh, I can get it for that. And they just don't realize how long, or like they just don't do the math. They don't look at the contract and actually see what they're paying.
There is times that that rent to own can make sense. So like a guy told me the other day, he's renting a 10 by 20 storage unit. I forget it was over $200 a month. In that case, I mean, if you bought a basic 10 by 20 shed, you're going to be writing that $250 a month on like a 5-year plan.
That makes sense.
That makes sense because at the end of 5 years paying that $200, you're going to have nothing. Whereas you could have that sit in that storage in your backyard, make that payment, and come up with a shed after 5 years.
And it's
you
way
actually
more convenient. Way
and
more convenient.
Yeah.
Like you have your shed in your backyard versus going to a storage. So like there's times where it makes sense.
So another benefit with like doing a rent to own shed versus like say the financing would be you can actually return the unit at any time. So
no penalties.
And there's no penalties. You're not gonna get a ding on your credit, anything like that. Just return it.
It's pretty simple.
Just one of the benefits. In fact, we just did that. I picked up a shed this week that was delivered like 8 months ago, roughly, and it was never used. You just returned it. So plans change. So you are not going to get any of your payments. That you're not going to get any money back, obviously, but it's a great option. So say you need a storage unit for a couple years and you're going to move, that could be an option. Just to kind of recap a few things that like to consider before you do enter into a rent to own contract. Make sure you understand what the total cost of ownership is. So your payment times the length of the contract. Another thing would be to make sure you understand, like, say I do want to purchase it early, so I actually own the shed. Make sure you understand what that looks like. Understand like your payment schedule. So like there's a lot of these rent to own companies, there's just a lot of late fees and stuff tied into them. So make sure like make your payments on time. You know when that payment's coming due.
And the terms and conditions, like what can I do with my shed?
Yeah,
What can I actually use it for? Because if you breach the contract, like that's it's not a good thing. Like they can come after
Yeah,
you
I mean,
if they want.
yeah, if you breach the contract in any way, it's like, I mean, they can,
Bill.
in the long run, it's their, it's the rental company's shed until you actually acquire ownership at the end of that contract or you purchase it early.
It's not yours.
Yeah, basically, the best thing for you to do is to thoroughly understand the terms. And another thing you can do is compare it with other financing options like a traditional loan, that sort of thing. Obviously, the no credit check looks appealing to a lot of customers. And
But
just
if-
make sure that the rent to own contract, this arrangement aligns with your financial needs and circumstances.